Iola Voss was 22. The warm last week of July morning, a thin manila envelope from the small Cherry County Treasurer's office in Valentine, Nebraska, arrived at the general delivery window in Lincoln, where she had been holding her mail for the previous 5 months. She had been sleeping in the long bed of her late father, Frank Voss's blue 1995 Ford F-150 pickup truck, in the third row, long-term parking lot of the Lincoln Walmart on North 27th Street since the second week of February. She had $241 in a small Pinnacle Bank account in Lincoln. She had a 4-year-old female sable and white English shepherd named Hattie, curled across the worn leather pickup bench seat at her right thigh most nights, with Hattie's intelligent, warm, amber working eyes turned the soft, watchful direction of the truck cab's passenger side door. Iola's mother, Katarzyna Voss, had died of metastatic stage 4 breast cancer in a small Lincoln hospice in the second week of the previous September. Iola had finished a bachelor's degree in range management at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in May. She had been working a counter shift at a small Lincoln feed and tax supply store for 11 months when her mother's medical copays had quietly emptied the last of the Voss family's small savings. She had not had a stable address since the third week of February. She had Hattie. She had her late father's pickup truck. She had a small water-stained sealed cedar cigar box of Katarzyna Voss's quiet handwritten letters in slow blue ballpoint. She had a worn black leather University of Nebraska-Lincoln graduation portfolio. The folded letter from the Cherry County Treasurer's office was a typed page on the small county letterhead, signed by a deputy treasurer named Mrs. Aldine Sunderman, who explained, in the careful, courteous language certain old Sandhills County treasurers used when writing to young women they had never met, that a small rural section line property on the southwest quarter of Section 14, Township 24 North, Range 30 west of Cherry County, 18 miles south of the small sandhills town of Mullen, Nebraska, had quietly come up for the 62nd straight year on the county tax auction rolls for a $10 administrative quitclaim transfer fee. The property, the treasurer wrote, was the former Voss Prairie School, established 1902 by the Cherry County School District 27 on a homestead acre quietly donated by Iola's great-great-grandfather, František Voss, and operated by his daughter, Mrs. Aldine Voss, as the district's lone teacher from 1922 through her retirement in the spring of 1962. The reason Mrs. Sunderman was writing to Iola directly, the letter continued, was that the Cherry County Treasurer's office had quietly been notified the previous month by an elderly Mullen resident named Mr. Sven Holm that Aldine Voss's great-great-granddaughter, Iola Voss, was the last living direct-line Voss descendant left in the central Sandhills, and that the schoolhouse parcel had to come home to a Voss, or it would not come home at all. Iola had not known her great-great-grandmother Aldine had taught at the small Voss Prairie School for 40 straight years. Her mother had never spoken of the schoolhouse in 22 straight years. She drove the F-150 north from Lincoln to Mullen that morning, with Hattie's warm sable head pressed soft against her right thigh, signed the quitclaim, drove out to the section line, and walked the schoolhouse property with Hattie on a slow, careful Sandhills late morning sweep. And when Hattie circled the same patch of bare cedar floorboard inside the small attached teacher's quarters at the back of the schoolhouse 3 straight times, sat down on her sable haunches across that patch of floorboard, looked back at Eola with the patient, intelligent, amber working eyes of a fourth-generation Sandhills English shepherd, and gave the single soft tracking chuff English shepherds give when they have found a thing their human has not yet seen the line on. Iola pried back the worn cedar floorboard with a small flat iron pry bar she had found in the small horse barn toolbox. And she found something her great-great-grandmother, Mrs. Aldine Voss, had been quietly preserving in a hand-built cedar-lined floor vault under the teacher's quarters floorboard for 62 straight Sandhills summers. The drive from Lincoln to Mullen took Iola a quiet 4.5 hours northwest on US 83 through Thedford and out into the deep central Sandhills country of Cherry County, then west on a small unpaved Sandhills section line road for 18 final dusty miles through the bright, fresh emerald green late July tall grass prairie hills, past slow-turning galvanized steel air motor windmills, standing tall and silent against the deep, clean Nebraska blue daytime sky. The Sandhills had finished the second cutting of native prairie hay in early July. The fresh new green of the sand bluestem, the big bluestem, the sandreed, and the prairie sandreed had grown back to a soft, fresh waist-high emerald, the color of a Nebraska Sandhills late July afternoon. The July Sandhills sky was a clean, deep panhandle blue with high, white, scattered cumulus clouds. The Voss Prairie School sat exactly where Mrs. Sunderman's hand-drawn pencil map had said it would sit, at the corner of two small, unpaved Sandhills section line roads on a soft, fresh emerald green ridge above a small Sandhills meander draw. The schoolhouse was a small one-story narrow 1902, white-painted clapboard, one-room prairie schoolhouse, perhaps 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, set on a low stone and mortar foundation, with a small cedar shingle bell tower on the front gable, holding a small bronze prairie school bell. A steep tin roof painted the original Cherry County School District, faded brick red, a small covered front porch, 4 tall narrow windows on each long side wall, a small attached teacher's sodden cedar quarters off the back, a small frame horse barn 50 feet to the west, and a slow-turning galvanized steel 1937 air motor windmill standing tall above a small stock tank to the north. A small, hand-painted black-on-white wooden sign mounted above the front porch door read, Voss Prairie School. Dist. 27, since 1902. The small brass schoolhouse key from Mrs. Sunderman's envelope turned on the first try in the front door padlock. Hey, friends. If you've made it this far into Iola's story, if you're sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of strong coffee and a small, quiet ache in your chest of a person who has been quietly carrying the weight of 2 parents, you lost too young, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Hattie circled in the small attached teacher's quarters, that hot July afternoon, is the part of this story I have been waiting all evening to tell you about. Welcome to Truth of the Roads. Settle in. The schoolhouse interior had not been operated as a school in 62 straight years. The inside was a small frozen museum of mid-20th century Sandhills one-room schoolhouse practice, exactly as Mrs. Aldine Voss had left it on the warm last May afternoon of her last day teaching in 1962. 2 rows of 8 original 1902 oak and cast iron Sears and Roebuck schoolhouse desks with attached inkwells stood facing a long oak teacher's desk at the front of the room. A small black slate chalkboard with the original 1902 pine frame ran the length of the front wall under the small original Nebraska state seal on the top center board, with Mrs. Voss's last day's lesson plan still chalked in her careful slanted hand. May 24th, 1962, Penmanship Review, read aloud, Sarah Plain and Tall. The original 1902 cast iron potbelly Sandhills schoolhouse stove stood in the corner of the back. A long wooden coat rack with 32 original brass-numbered student coat hooks ran along the back wall. A small framed black and white 1928 class photograph of 26 small Sandhills children sat above the teacher's desk in a simple oak frame. The whole interior smelled of cedar floor wax and the faint, dry, clean prairie smell of 40 years of slow-cooled potbelly wood smoke and warm Sandhills summer through the open windows. Hattie patted carefully the entire length of the schoolhouse on her bright, clean, white-stockinged English shepherd paws. She sniffed the cast-iron stove. She sniffed the bronze schoolhouse bell rope hanging at the front of the room. She sniffed the long oak teacher's desk. Then she walked directly through the small back door into the small attached teacher's quarters, walked to a specific six-board section of worn cedar floor against the back wall of the small bedroom, made 3 slow, careful working shepherd circles across that section of cedar floorboard, sat down on her sable haunches, looked back over her white-blazed shoulder at Iola, and gave a single soft tracking chuff so quiet a person standing at the front door would not have heard it. Iola pried back the third cedar floorboard with the small, flat iron pry bar from the horse barn toolbox on the second, careful pry. Underneath the floorboard was a hand-built cedar-lined floor vault, perhaps 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and 2.5 feet tall, built directly into the floor framing of the small teacher's quarters and lined with smooth, aromatic red cedar boards by a careful Sandhills woodworker in the summer of 1939. The vault held a small dark green painted Wells Fargo strongbox. The strongbox held a thick weatherproof leather-bound photograph album of every single one of Mrs. Aldine Voss's 40 straight Sandhills school years. 976 small Sandhills children's annual class photographs, 1922 through 1962, hand-numbered in faded slanted ink in the corners. Beside the strongbox was a tall cedar 3-shelf storage cabinet holding 40 leather-bound annual schoolhouse ledgers, dated 1922 through 1962 in faded gold ink on their spines, every single one of Mrs. Voss's careful daily lesson plans, and Sandhills weather notes recorded in her slow, slanted, careful hand. Beside the cabinet, against the cedar back wall of the vault, was a small hand-built solid brass-bound cedar and tin Sandhills seed vault, 20 inches wide and 12 inches tall, with the careful slanted handwritten label across the front, Voss Homestead Heirloom Seed Vault, A. Voss, Summer 1939. Inside the seed vault, neatly arrayed in 86 small dry brown labeled glass apothecary jars, sealed with wax and clean cork stoppers, was Mrs. Aldine Voss's complete collection of Homestead-era heirloom Sandhills seed strains. There were Czech American Hodonin red kidney beans her grandmother Anna had carried from Morava in the spring of 1873. There was Pawnee scarlet runner corn her grandfather František had quietly traded for with a Pawnee elder named Rowan Horse in the summer of 1882. There was Sandhills wheat, a single-handed selection Landrace Aldine herself had bred down from 1924 through 1962. There was a small dry brown labeled jar of original Homestead Hubbard squash her mother, Helena, had grown along the south draw from the summer of 1899 onward. There was Sandhills sandreed prairie native grass seed, hand-collected by Aldine in the autumn of 1934 from a single small surviving original native prairie quarter section the federal government had spared from the plow in the Dust Bowl. And in the back of the seed vault, in a small, simple sealed manila envelope on top of the 86th glass jar, was a single, careful 3-page Sandhills handwritten letter from Mrs. Aldine Voss, dated 18th of May, 1962, addressed in her slanted blue ink to "For the Voss Who Comes Back." Iola sat down on the worn cedar floor of the small back teacher's quarters, and Hattie pressed her sable head, warm against Iola's left thigh, and Iola opened the letter. Some women inherit silver, some women inherit china. Mrs. Aldine Voss had quietly spent 23 straight years of her quiet Sandhills school teaching, life selecting, propagating, and seed saving every single homestead era, heirloom, Sandhills crop, strain her Czech American family and her Pawnee neighbors had quietly carried into the central Sandhills since the spring of 1873, and she had hidden the master's seed vault under her schoolhouse bedroom floorboard. For the day a Voss-blooded young woman with a degree in range management would finally walk back into the Sandhills and understand what was on those 86 small, dry brown apothecary jar labels. Aldine's 3-page letter was dated May of 1962. It explained, in her careful slanted Sandhills hand, that she had spent the years between 1939 and 1962 quietly assembling the seed vault from her grandmother's Morava landrace strains, from her grandfather's careful Pawnee traded corn, from her mother's homestead garden squash, from her own 40-year teacher's garden hand selections, and from the careful gleanings of her surviving Sandhills neighbors during the bad Dust Bowl summers of 1934 through 1939. She had built the cedar floor vault in the summer of 1939 with a quiet Mullen carpenter named Mr. Lambert Holm, Sven Holm's grandfather. She had selected the small bedroom floorboard recess specifically because no Cherry County school inspector would ever look there. Aldine's letter ended, "For the Voss who comes back, the seeds are not mine. They are the careful selections of 4 straight generations of Sandhills Voss women and the quiet trades of the Pawnee neighbors who fed us when we first arrived. Take them to the USDA National Laboratory for Genetic Resources Preservation in Fort Collins, Colorado. Take them to Iowa State Seed Savers in Decorah if Fort Collins is too far. Do not sell them. Do not let any private holding company own any single one of them. The seeds belong to anyone who plants them in clean Sandhills sand. Take care of the dog if there is one." Mrs. Aldine. Eli Knudsen drove his small dust-covered gray 2003 Chevy Silverado pickup down the section line road at 6:20 the next morning. He was 30, a former U.S. Army National Guard cavalry scout out of the 106th Cavalry Regiment, lean and tall and quiet, with close-cropped sandy brown hair, a 3-day beard, a faded olive drab 167th Cav t-shirt under a worn canvas chore coat, dusty brown Wesco lace-up Sandhills work boots, and the careful, watchful posture of a man who had been to a place he had not yet found the words for. He was Mrs. Hilda Vanek's grandson by her late husband's youngest sister. He had heard, the way young Sandhills veterans hear things, from Mrs. Vanek's quiet phone call at 5:05 that morning, that the old Voss Prairie schoolhouse had come back into Voss family ownership the previous afternoon, and that the new owner was a 22-year-old University of Nebraska Lincoln Range Management graduate, sleeping in her father's pickup truck. Eli knocked very gently on the front porch door of the schoolhouse at 6:23. Iola opened the front door with an enameled blue tin mug of black drip coffee in her right hand. She said, "Help you?" Eli said, "Ma'am, my name is Eli Knudsen. My grandmother Hilda Vanek called me at 5:05 this morning to suggest I drive down from the home ranch east of Mullen because the schoolhouse windmill needs the rod packing replaced, and the south horse barn corner is rotting where the foundation has settled. Iola said, "What was your job in the Guard?" Eli said, "Cavalry scout, ma'am. 8 years, 2 deployments to Iraq, one to a small base in eastern Poland. I came home 17 months ago because Grandpa Holmes' back went out and somebody had to put up his hay." Iola said, "I'm sorry." Eli said, "I'm sorry about your mama Katarzyna. The whole Central Sandhills knew her." Iola said, "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight, Eli?" Eli looked at the cab of his Silverado. He looked back at her. He did not answer. Iola said, "There is a small attached teacher's quarters in the back of the schoolhouse with a working iron frame bed and a working 1902 cast iron potbelly stove. I have $241 in a Lincoln Credit Union account. I cannot pay you anything for the first month, but if you can help me figure out how to safely transport 86 small heirloom sandhill seed strains to the USDA Fort Collins National Laboratory for Genetic Resources Preservation by Labor Day, and if you can help me get the windmill rod packed before haying season ends, I can probably pay you a real wage by the first hard frost. Coffee's on the stove, doors open." Eli stood at the small front porch door for a long, quiet Sandhills minute. Then he walked back to his Silverado and pulled a small olive-drab army duffel out of the cab, walked back to the front porch, set the duffel inside the threshold, and said, "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hilda Vanek drove up the section line road in a small, dusty white 1998 Buick LeSabre at 10:10 the next morning. She was 81 years old, a small Czech-American Sandhills woman no taller than 5'1", with short silver-white hair pulled into a small tidy bun, round wire-rimmed bifocals, a long pale cream cotton apron over a faded blue floral cotton house dress, and tall brown leather Sandhills work boots up to her knees. She carried a covered enameled white cast iron Dutch oven of slow-cooked Czech-American Svichkova beef cheek in cream gravy, and a folded clean blue and white Czech dish towel containing a fresh-baked tall warm Sandhills sour cream Kolas pastry pan. She did not knock. She walked through the open front porch door of the schoolhouse, set the Svichkova Dutch oven and the kolache pan on the long oak teacher's desk at the front of the schoolroom, and looked at Iola across the warm, shadowy schoolhouse interior with the soft, careful patience of a woman who had been waiting 62 straight Sandhills summers to deliver a single specific Dutch oven of Svichkova. She said, "Iola, baby, I have been the unofficial mother hen of the small Central Sandhills Czech-American community for 53 straight years. Your great-great-grandmother, Mrs. Aldine Voss, taught me how to plant Hubbard squash from her homestead jars in the spring of 1949 when I was 4 years old. I sat at the teacher's desk, back end of this small schoolroom every Saturday afternoon for 16 straight years between the age of 4 and the year she retired. I sat there because she was always reading aloud to somebody, and she was always reading aloud to the oldest somebody in the community. And she quietly told me the last Saturday afternoon before she retired that the day a Voss-blooded young woman with a degree in range management would finally walk back into the Sandhills was the day the seed vault would finally come back to the prairie. Your mother, Katarzyna, quietly told me 2 weeks before her hospice transfer last August that she had been holding 51 years of her own quiet handwritten letters to you in a small water-stained sealed cedar cigar box under her hospital bed, that she had been waiting to give them to you when she thought you were ready. She told me to tell you about the cigar box if I ever got the chance. I am telling you about the cigar box now. Eat the svichkova, baby. The goulash is still warm. Iola said, Mrs. Vanek. Mrs. Vanek said, Hilda, baby. Iola said, all right. Hattie walked over to Hilda and sat down on the cedar floor across Hilda's left brown work boot and looked up at her with the soft, intelligent, amber working eyes of a fourth-generation Sandhills English shepherd. Hilda bent very slowly down and scratched the soft sable fur on the back of Hattie's strong shepherd neck with her thin, freckled Czech-American hand, and said, in her soft, careful Sandhills accent, "Hello, miss. You are a very good shepherd. Mrs. Aldine would have loved you. Frank would have loved you. Your Mama Katarzyna would have loved you the day you came home with Iola." Marlena Voss Bennett called Iola's cell phone at 10:30 on the morning of the second Wednesday in August. Marlena was a 47-year-old senior heritage seed acquisition officer for a Cargill-affiliated holding company based in New York and Wichita, and she was Iola's first cousin once removed on her father's side. Iola had not seen Marlena since her father Frank's funeral when Iola was 14. Marlena's voice on the line had the bright, crisp tone certain corporate acquisition officers used when they had decided they were the only adult in any given family conversation. She told Iola, with the careful, courteous condescension corporate seed buyers reserved for young Sandhills women whose names had not yet appeared in industry trade press, that the Cargill subsidiary had been notified the previous Friday by a small Mullen attorney that the Voss Prairie Schoolhouse had come back into Voss family ownership and that an undisclosed seed collection had quietly surfaced on the parcel. She said she had been authorized by the company's Heritage Seed Acquisition Department to make a one-time offer of $460,000 cash for full proprietary rights to the 86 strain Voss Heirloom Collection, sight unseen, with a 14-day close, all paperwork handled by her New York office. Iola said, "Marlena, the seeds are not for sale." Marlena said, "Cousin, I understand the sentimental weight of inherited materials. Could I fly out next Tuesday and walk?" Iola said, "Marlena, the seeds are not for sale at any price. They are being donated intact to the USDA National Laboratory for Genetic Resources Preservation in Fort Collins under a permanent public domain accession agreement with a permanent traveling lone rider, so that propagation samples can rotate through Iowa State Seed Savers Exchange, the Pawnee Nation Seed Bank in Pawnee, Oklahoma, the University of Nebraska, Lincoln's Sandhills Range Station in Whitman, and the Cherry County 4-H every 5 years for student propagation. The schoolhouse is reopening in late September as a small Sandhills Heritage Prairie education station run by the Cherry County Historical Society. The original 1902 schoolhouse interior is going on permanent open house display. The seed vault stays here in the cedar floor recess until the USDA truck arrives Labor Day weekend. You are welcome to drive out for the accession dedication next April. Have a good morning, cousin." Marlena called back 11 days later with 790,000. She called back 2 weeks after that with 1,140,000 for the entire collection, plus a separate side offer of 310,000 for the Pawnee Scarlet Runner corn alone. Iola said no, in the same calm voice from the same windmill base, with the same English shepherd at her left boot. Each time she hung up, Hilda was somewhere nearby, with a fresh covered Dutch oven of pork and sauerkraut, or svichkova, or a fresh baked kolache pan, and Hilda said only some version of baby. The seeds belong to the prairie. You hold, and Iola held. The small water-stained sealed cedar cigar box from under her mother's hospice bed, which Iola finally drove down to a small Lincoln storage unit to retrieve in the third week of August, contained 2,471 carefully sealed, handwritten Katarzyna Voss letters to Iola, written in soft blue ballpoint pen on plain white spiral notebook paper, dated from the first day of Iola's kindergarten in August of 2008 through the third week of September of the previous year. Katarzyna had quietly written Iola 3 letters a week for 16 straight years and had never given her a single one. The box was every single Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday of Iola's life, written down, sealed, and kept. Iola sat on the small covered front porch of the Voss Prairie School that long, warm Saturday evening with the cedar cigar box of 2,471 unread letters at her left boot, and Hattie's sable body curled warm across her right boot, and she read the first letter, dated the third Wednesday in August of 2008. Katarzyna had been 34 years old. The letter was 2 careful blue ballpoint pages. It said, in part, Iola Brochek. They tell me you are going to kindergarten this morning. I have been waiting 6 years to tell you I love you in a way you might one day read. I will write you 3 letters a week for the rest of my life. You do not have to read them. You do not have to know. I just need to write them. Mama. The next 2,470 letters in the box were the small, careful, steady continuation of that promise. 3 letters a week, every Wednesday and Friday and Sunday, for 16 straight years, through Iola's father's tractor rollover, through Iola's high school graduation, through her acceptance at UNL, through her mother's diagnosis, all the way to a small final letter dated the third Wednesday of September the previous year that simply read, Iola Bruchek, I am tired. I love you. I am proud. Find the windmill that turns slow. Mama, Aunt Wendy Voss called Iola's cell phone from Omaha at 11:05 the following Tuesday morning. She was 56 years old. She had not spoken to anyone in the Sandhills since her older brother Frank's funeral 8 years before. She said she had quietly seen Katarzyna's small obituary in the Lincoln paper the previous September, that she had not known what to say at the time, that she had been carrying the silence for 10 months. She said she had seen a small AP wire service photograph that morning of the schoolhouse reopening event flyer the Cherry County Historical Society had posted on social media. She said she had a small box of Frank's quiet childhood letters that her mother had given her in 1989, that she had been meaning to mail to Iola for 10 straight months and had not done. She asked very quietly if she could possibly drive out to Mullen the following Saturday. Iola, on the schoolhouse front porch with Hattie at her left boot, said yes. The small Sandhills Heritage Prairie Education Station opened to the public on a warm Saturday morning in the third week of September on the small covered front porch of the restored Voss Prairie School as the smallest registered nonprofit Sandhills Prairie Heritage Education Station in the central Nebraska Sandhills. Eli had stabilized the South Horse Barn corner and repacked the windmill rod. Hilda had organized the Cherry County Historical Society's small Saturday open house volunteer rotation. The USDA Fort Collins lab had sent down a small accession team for the previous 3 weeks to bring the 86 heirloom seed strains to safe accession transport condition. The schoolhouse bell, silent since 1962, had been rerun for the first time on the opening Saturday morning by Mr. Sven Holm, 83 years old, the carpenter Lambert Holm's grandson. Aunt Wendy had driven out from Omaha the previous weekend with the small box of Frank's childhood letters and had stayed 3 nights in the back teacher's quarters. The 2,471 Katarzyna letters lived in a small, clean white archival storage box on the teacher's desk, with the careful blue ballpoint pages of Wednesday, Friday, Sunday mornings, preserved for Iola to read at her own quiet, steady pace. The windmill turned slow above the stock tank. Iola Voss was 23 years old now. She was the founding director of the Voss Prairie Sandhills Heritage Education Station, established 1902 by František Voss and reopened in 2026 by his great-great-great-granddaughter, Iola. She had Eli on the windmill. She had Hilda on the Saturday open house. She had Hattie at her left boot. She had her mother's letters in the small archival box. She had Aunt Wendy on the phone every Sunday evening. She had $326,000 in a small Mullen Community Bank in the schoolhouse's name, the USDA Accession Partnership Endowment Principal, held in trust for the Heritage Education Station's first decade of operating expenses, and a small Katarzyna Voss, first-generation Sand Hills Range Management Scholarship. She had quietly endowed at the UNL Range Station in Whitman. The schoolhouse bell rang the second Sunday of every month at 10 in the morning. The potbelly stove ticked. The colache was always warm. The seed vault under the cedar floorboard was empty now, but the cedar smell of it stayed. The windmill turned slow above the stock tank. The schoolhouse door was open. The sand hills wind moved bright, fresh emerald green through the sand blue stem, all the way to the horizon, and everything was exactly where it ought to be. This has been Truth of the Roads. If you've stayed with us this long, thank you. If Iola's story meant something to you tonight, leave a comment below telling us about the small faraway place that has been waiting on you. We read everyone. We will see you on the next quiet road.